should civilians have access to the same type of training the military law enforcement does? Like, not just hey, can we do a closed enrollment class for law enforcement military? It's, should we be teaching these things?
What's happening, my friends? John Lovell, Warrior Poet Society. I'm joined with Paul, our battle gnome, training director at Warrior Poet Society. We're going to have a chat today about whether civilians should engage in classes that are really more built for military and law enforcement. So what do you think? Let's say I just came to you and I'm like, man, I think we should have an LE only class on blah, blah, blah.
That question itself, sure, I don't see a problem with that. It's going to be context driven, right? It's based on their mission. We're going to specifically tailor training to law enforcement that we're not going to offer civilians, because I'm like, hey, I don't need to teach you how to do a felony stop or some sort of high risk driving necessarily, right? I think part of the question is some of the internet discussion that I've seen out there has been, should civilians have access to the same type of training the military law enforcement does? Like, not just hey, can we do a closed enrollment class for law enforcement military? It's, should you do it? One, as a trainer, should you provide it, because you might be giving away tactics, techniques, and procedures, things like that bad guys could use. As far as trainers putting the information out there, I don't think it's that big a deal, because the information is already open source. It's already out there. Most military field manuals are out there online, available. They're not classified. Right. It's not that classified information has gotten out and it's now open source, available to the public. It's just, it's not classified information. There are certain things that we know when we're training foreign militaries, foreign governments, things like that, that are going to come under some regulations under the State Department, and there's things that we don't teach foreign militaries, foreign governments.
And even more under ITAR restrictions, which is rules for us and not the government, who can drop $81 million of high-tech ITAR-controlled substances and give them to our enemies abroad. So they can do it, but we can't, because if I have a non-U.S. citizen who is, legally in the United States, they're able to attend certain classes, like a Pistol 1. Or like competition or home defense, but I can't train them in any type of military tactics, I believe, even if it is more open source, because of my background and because of the nature of what it is. I think it is violating ITAR, and so I can't do that. Immediately, like the constitutionalist rises in me of like, how to provide military or LE training and deny it to the civilian smacks of some like King George, no step on snake kind of stuff. The spirit behind the Second Amendment is every man, woman, and child was able to have access to military weapons and be able to train and be dangerous, but the right of the people to keep and bear arms should not be infringed. And just as that applies to arms, why would that not naturally have in their mind the training then when attached to the arms? For me, it's like a constitutional no-no to say we can train the cops and we can train the military guys, but not use civilian peasants. Sure. They even had great fear of a standing army. So today we have standing armies and we accept that, and that's what we have. But to them, they felt like that was a death knell for the American future. And so, train all of the people. And so that was the idea. Now, that didn't last long. We ended up getting an army, and then the army stayed for future conflicts, which meant we now have a standing army. And so now there's this great divide. But in the mind of the founders who penned the Second Amendment, the idea is every man, woman, and child would have the arms and the training. And so for me, I don't like the idea of anything that the military or law enforcement gets training-wise that the civilians don't get as well.
Sure.
And so there's the constitutional purist in me that does that. But here we are arguing some cases of like, well, there's some ITAR stuff, there's some safety stuff. You mentioned some context stuff.
In terms of what's applicable to civilians versus military law enforcement.
Meaning you could do it, but you're going to show up and you'll watch what's happening and you'll be like, this doesn't apply to me and I don't know what to do. This is stupid. Well, like, for instance, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I don't think anybody does that. I think civilians that like want to go take like Team CQB, or they want to get some basic patrolling and, small unit tactics type stuff. No, I think they show up to it wide-eyed, knowing that this is not necessarily contextually relevant for them in a defensive situation, right? Yeah. The chances of them having to do this real world, it's slim to none. But they're
Yeah.
there to have a good time and enjoy it. I think that's kind of also part of this is building a community around some really cool activities. And I think it's better than sitting around on your couch watching sports all day.
I
You know,
agree.
actually
Yeah.
get out there and engage in some actual masculinity, not just vicarious masculinity, right?
like that.
Like
I
go
like
have a good
that.
time with like-minded people.
Though I'm thinking, like right now, I was considering this five-day combatives course. One of the days was just on handcuffing techniques. It's a full day out of those 5. And a civilian in that, it's kind of like, all right, I get it. A full day for handcuffing, and they crushed the course on the critiques. I'm like, that was a waste of time. But every LE guy in that class, and the class was meant for LE, handcuffing is a really, really, really big deal. So the context itself of a department or a military unit will have very specific kit that maybe you don't have, or specific SOP, standard operating procedures, that you don't run by. They may have an ROI, rules of engagement, ROI, ROE. I've been out too long. I've been out of military too long.
It's
and in
okay. Don't
business
judge
too
him. It's
long.
all right.
Oh, that was terrible. That was terrible. ROE, rules
There's
of
RFPs for this sort of thing.
whatever.
Letters.
P&L sheets. There's different rules of engagement
Sure.
applying to a military and law enforcement context that is just frankly different for you. And so you try to do something that a cop is allowed to do, but you're not allowed to do. That's kidnapping. A cop can hold him, but you holding him, that's kidnapping in that state. You're not allowed to put hands on them in the way a cop can. And so you could get in a whole lot of trouble because you were practicing in a context that didn't apply to you.
There are laws for citizens arrest, though.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
Yeah,
But-
read your local statutes. They're out there. But
and
yes,
the key word was local.
Sure.
And that may fly of like in Alabama, citizens arrest, all right. They'll show up and give you a high five and,
Right.
whatever of like, you trade war stories with the deputies, and you do that in D.C., you're going to jail forever. It doesn't matter if you were right. In fact, the more right you are, the more wrong you're going to be punished. And so you just got to know that stuff, and that's important. I was thinking the context changes are really there, and so that could justify why it might not. You might want to get in there, and once you got in there, you're like, oh, well, this isn't exactly what I was after. However, there are some times where it could be downright dangerous for you to do it. Team CQB. As a solo guy, you're like, all right, and I've learned some Team CQB, and that's really fun. And then what you accidentally do is you bring that knowledge of how to clear with a group of individuals into your own single-man clearing. You're like, well, I know how to clear rooms as a team. And then in your context, whether it's something that happens in an active killer context, or you're solo in your house doing a home defense thing, or your house is broken into, a shady vehicle in the drive next to your wife's vehicle, doors open, and you go in room clearing, hunting for this guy who may be doing whatever to your wife. That could be your context. And if you clear like you have a team with you, but you don't, you're walking into the jaws of death. It's so easy to kill you. Also, there's different ways soldiers move on a battlefield. You can take somebody who's kind of up doing the Instagram thing, and they're moving kind of like a competitive shooter, had a baby with a cosplay in a video game, and then this comes out, and it's like moving around and shooting real fast, and it looks great. And for a solo movement, that could work awesome, maybe. Except you're rushing toward the target, so you're going to shoot a lot of people, and you're really easy to kill at the same time because the movement's all wrong. But if you did that in a military context, well, the military guys don't fight like that. You don't get up and hero around a range shooting all kinds of targets real quick. Instead, you immediately return fire in the direction where you receive contact and hit the ground. Once that or whatever cover you can get. Then you all get online. That's the next thing. Everyone get online. And then you gain fire superiority, pick up your rate of fire, and then a leader makes a call for some type of flanking element. This is just one. We mentioned military field manuals here, fresh out of 7-8.
Two things. First of all, it's no longer 7-8. Just so you know,
It
we're
will
old.
always be
We're old.
7-8 in my heart. I'm a dinosaur. I don't care.
I know, SH21-76, I think it's still there. But anyway, the second thing is, instead of one of the young cats jumping in there and correcting us. All right, we know. The next thing is, so let's say Team CQB, we kind of agree that that's outside the normal scope of operations for defensive shooting context for civilians. what if you got a group of buddies? What if you got your bros and you want to go do this and kind of work as an organic element and do some team CQB, man? What do you think of that?
I love that. That's awesome. Can I come?
Right. No, because you're not part of the team, and that's kind of part of the point.
I want to be in the, there's like secret handshake? How do I get in your club? Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. And I think that's in the spirit of the Second Amendment as well, which is recognizing, no, Second Amendment exists as a check against tyranny.
Right.
What I don't want is Big Brother to have the monopoly on violence, both the tools of violence and the training to employ it. So no. I love the idea of civilians training together in groups of people. And that's, hey, it gets you off the couch. It's good to move your muscles. It's good to be able to be better protectors. And if any socioeconomic collapse happened, I know real hard to consider these days as we're dangling over the precipice of an entire socioeconomic collapse. But if something ever went sideways, you and your buddies could make a safe space, safe haven. You could be a force for good in your specific area. And in the way to play zone, if our infrastructure fell apart, it's all going to come down to individuals, families, communities.
Yeah, I think something else too. I mean, our historically, we've had institutions specifically set up for this purpose. The NRA, right? They were founded by a couple of Union officers who recognized that the Union Army conscripts during the Civil War were not as good when it came to marksmanship ability as the Confederate military.
I
right?
bet King Wayne LaPierre was ruling back then too. He's an institution.
Yeah, despite
He's never
despite
going
what
away.
despite what you
He'll
think,
never go away.
Despite what you think now, okay. About the organization, at least initially, the idea was, hey, we're going to provide some civilian marksmanship training so that, and it was for a military application. It was not so they could be really good at winning bullseye competitions. It was to train them so that if we do go to war again, then we have a citizenry that already has kind of like this baseline skill set, right? You look at the French and Indian War, right? I think ended around 1767, I guess, about 10 years before we got our, before we declared our independence. The guys that were training the Continental Army, right, those were all French and Indian veterans, French and Indian War veterans, like Washington, right? These guys were already blooded combat vets who had already been in it, but we had a bunch of other guys who had not. And so these guys had to train these dudes. They had to get them drilled up and stuff. If they'd already come with some kind of pre-established training, that would have been a good thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
World War II, first peacetime draft, I think, that we'd had, 50 million registered for the draft. I think 10 million had to were actually drafted into military service. We started that around 1940 because we were kind of getting nervous about what was going on in Europe at the time, as we should have been. France had fallen, and so we kind of got ahead of this thing a little bit. But imagine the guys that were drafted; they already came with some kind of solid skills.
Big deal.
And I'm not talking about CQB. And everybody says CQB, and that's what we use as an example, right? But just land navigation. Right? Just some basic small unit tactics, just understanding of some core concepts along with marksmanship fundamentals. Of course, you got to be who what you're aiming at. If you can't shoot when the time comes, then none of the other stuff matters.
Right.
But I think those are all kind of good, solid examples as to why you might want to have a citizenry that at least somewhat dabbles or has some sort of working knowledge of these things. Yeah, they're not going to be experts. They're not going to be the best guys. We're not going to turn all the civilians, we're not going to turn the 99% into the top 1%. Totally understand that. But just a little bit of an edge when it comes to possibly winning wars, to fight against a foreign invasion. If we had to draft dudes right now into service, them coming with some sort of baseline understanding of some core concepts, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, and men need an outlet for masculinity. We need to howl at the moon, do stuff that's dangerous and gritty and tough, challenging, and it makes us stronger men and better protectors. And if you're not doing that, you just default to watching sports all day, doing the video game things, scrolling your life away, and being just a round slug that is generally not useful. And so I really like the idea of like, hey, let's get out and do something. Of like, well, this doesn't really apply to you. I'm like, yeah, but I want to do it anyway. I'm like, well, roger that. Welcome. That's awesome. That's great.
Okay,
just understand how this applies to you, how it doesn't. Don't take training scars that are good in one context and hurtful to you in another context. Know what you're getting into. Let's not sell snake oil to you of like, you need this and this. And they like totally don't need it.
Right.
But so I got nothing else. You got anything for these folks?
Yikes.
Not these guys, just them.
Just those?
Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. If you'd like to train with Warrior Poet Society, love to have you. Train hard, train smart, stay free. Check down below. Links, like, subscribe, share, comment. I said all the things, right, Ben?
You got it.
I said it all. Goodbye to you guys. Goodbye to you guys. Thanks for hanging out. Cheers.